I think absolutely it's a significant concern if we have 9 of 10 individuals who are not diagnosed.
She almost bled to death because the doctors kept saying, well, a woman can't have a bleeding disorder. You're lying to us, so we're not going to give you that medication.
You don't need 100 friends. You just need, friends or family members to understand and to get you. You just need that certain core people that are going to be there for you.
I think a lot of our women wait longer than maybe they need to because we've been taught as young women that this is just how our family works and this is just how our family, engages.
Oh, hands down, that would be my mom. From day one, she has pushed and advocated and just really gone above and beyond for me.
I love my children more than anything in this whole world, and my one and only job is to take care of them. It's just so important to be accurately diagnosed for families.
I'm getting teary-eyed talking about this because I don't think I give her enough credit in my life. She was a single mom and she fought tooth and nail to make sure that no matter what, we knew about our disorders and that we had the treatment that we needed.
If you're in the ER and they say, oh, well, it's 2 hours away, and you're like, no, this is an emergency. You have to sometimes use your aggressive adult tone rather than the nice tone.
I think being an advocate and a self-advocate for yourself or your family is an absolute necessity. We're all going through this, and there's no reason we need to go through this alone.
In our first 2 episodes of von Willebrand disease, diagnosis, treatment, and life, we heard from people all over the country and the world who live with or treat von Willebrand disease. Their stories are moving, scary, funny, insightful. We'll hear more of those stories in this, our 3rd and final episode. We'll also finally give our answer to the question, is von Willebrand disease a health crisis? As we said in previous episodes, the answer is more complicated than you might imagine. Finally, in this episode, we'll discuss the meaning of community, from bold outreach and educational programs put together by national organizations to the importance of connecting on a local level with other von Willebrand patients and families. Let's start with what we know. We know what it's like to live with VWD, whether you're diagnosed or undiagnosed. Heavy bleeding, social isolation, lost opportunities, low quality of life. We know it takes on average 16 years from symptoms to a von Willebrand diagnosis. We know studies show that 9 out of 10 people with von Willebrand disease remain undiagnosed. We know that even with severe symptoms, many of the patients and their parents were doubted, refused treatment, told they were imagining things, and even called crazy. We know that some families who strongly believe they have von Willebrand disease in the family will refuse testing for fear of losing their insurance because of how costly bleeding disorders can be. Doesn't all of this add up to a crisis? If you ask patients, the answer is often some form of yes. After all, for the person living with VWD, it can be a daily struggle for years to diagnose and then manage life-altering symptoms. But the medical reality is life-altering is not necessarily life-threatening or life-ending. And in the medical profession, that is typically the difference between labeling a disease a crisis or not. Here again, there's a disconnect between the patient experience and the medical reaction. If we're not going to label VWD a crisis, can the VWD community trust that the medical community feels the same sense of urgency as those who isolate themselves for fear of embarrassing bleeds in public? Or the same sense of urgency felt by those who are threatened with being held back in school because of missed days? Or the same sense of urgency felt by those who have been rejected for treatment by their local HTC? To help address this disconnect, we asked both national bleeding disorder organizations about their programs to reach and support people with VWD.
I believe certainly it's a concern. We're really deeply concerned when we hear stories from our families who are undiagnosed for years and suffering needlessly.
This is Kimberly Hugstead, President and CEO of the Hemophilia Federation of America.
We're committed to bringing awareness to the national population here in the U.S. and providing education and information to help families so they get what they need. The thing that we have to really be clear on is that this is not a one-and-done methodology in terms of how we go about educating our family about their bleeding disorder.
NHF dating back to 2014 recognized that we really needed to focus way more on von Willebrand disease. Hi, my name is Corinne Kernick, and I am a manager of education at the National Hemophilia Foundation. Within the consumer education piece, we have created specific workshops just for VWD. So we have currently VWD Your Voice Matters, really talking about advocacy and advocating in tough situations with your medical providers, with your boss, your work, with your partner. The workshops are part of our Education for Empowerment program, and these workshops are available by request, and chapters and HTCs can request these workshops, and they can request them online, and we actually will go out to chapters and HTCs around the country free of charge and present these for their annual meetings or infusion weekends or whatever the educational event may be. And we recognize, though, that a lot of chapters, HTCs as well, have limited funding. So they want to do a lot of education, but they may not have the funding. So we've started to actually give people who request these programs a $500 per workshop grant to use toward kind of supplementing the cost.
Both national organizations made it clear during our interviews that they've grown their VWD resources and continue to. NHF even changed its motto recently to "For All Bleeding Disorders," in part at least to be inclusive toward and raise awareness of VWD. So there does seem to be a shift towards supporting von Willebrand disease more and more.
One of the other pieces that we've done a lot of work on, and actually we'll be unveiling this summer, we have reorganized and updated our website with a great deal of additional medical information.
This is Kimberly Hugstead again.
Another activity that we are engaged in a really neat and meaningful way, and I think over time this will be really positive and we'll broaden it on a national basis, but we're piloting a concept of reaching out to school nurse educators, and we find that in that school setting, when you're a little boy or a little girl in that elementary, middle school realm, bloody noses, young girls in their menstrual periods that have gone, just are very, very heavy and whatnot. It's a school nurse that can pick up on those kinds of things. So it isn't even the physician at the hospital or your OBGYN or going to your local physician. It's a school nurse that might see that first.
One of NHF's new programs is aimed at improving diagnosis for women and men who show symptoms and search online for solutions. That program is called Better You Know.
Our Better You Know program is through a grant from the CDC, a 5-year cooperative agreement. How can we get the word out to those people in the world living with a bleeding disorder who don't know it? How can we reach them, help them get treatment and care, a better life? And so that's where Better You Know started. The website is betteryouknow.org. And so when someone comes and finds this site or hears about it and comes to the site, whether you're a man or woman, you can take an assessment tool, and it's a series of questions, and they ask you about your bleeding history and symptoms. And at the end, you will be given either you're quote unquote at risk or not at risk for a bleeding disorder based on your answers. And if you are at risk or not at risk, you are then led to a series of information about what to do next. Because a lot of times people may think, oh my gosh, I have these symptoms, but where do I go now? Who do I see? What's the hematologist? What do I do? So this website really leads people from start to finish, and it tells them what type of medical provider to see next, what to bring to this medical appointment, what kind of questions to come with, what kind of information to bring that can really, expedite the process of figuring out what's going on.
Kimberly Hugstead again.
We provide targeted sessions at our member organizations, and that includes peer mentoring sessions, because one of the most valuable things that we find in learning about your own disorder is to talk to others with the same condition. And through that discussion, you pick up on ideas and tips and tricks about how to go forward. And of course, we do national webinars. We have our annual symposium every year. We actually started something really special this past year in 2017, just last week, with our targeted track. It's a full day of von Willebrand education for our families, and it really was very successful. We plan to continue to do that.
As a person affected by von Willebrand disease, or as a person suffering heavy bleeding who thinks they may be affected by von Willebrand disease, it's important to know that you are not alone. While von Willebrand disease is the most common hereditary bleeding disorder, it often goes unrecognized. People with von Willebrand disease can often feel isolated, and that the impact of their condition on their quality of life is minimized or dismissed. This is why Shire is committed to bringing greater awareness to this often overlooked condition. They understand that you are more than just your bleed. They see you, they hear you, and they are committed to serving you. To learn more, visit beyondthebleed.com.
Kimberly and Corinne both hit on an interesting point here. The programming from organizations that support VWD patients should involve diagnosed VWD patients and utilize their voices to help reach and connect with others. It sounds obvious, but when we harness the power of community interaction, it makes both the programs and the patients stronger.
I got involved with my local chapter really at a young age when we moved to Wisconsin at age like 6 or 7.
This is Michelle.
My mom started becoming really active with the Wisconsin chapter, and she was, I would say, like kind of one of the key movers and shakers of the Project Red Flag movement, which is now Victory for Women with NHF. And she created this program in Wisconsin for Girl Scouts to get their health badge by learning about bleeding disorders. And so she would take us to that. She would take me and my sisters to different Girl Scout events. She would take us to tabling events, and that kind of like sparked my like passion for advocacy. And through that, I eventually ended up getting involved with NYLI through NHF. I've been to 2 world meetings, one of which I was a Susan Skinner Scholar. And I've been going to Camp Old Eagle in Michigan for kids with bleeding disorder since 1999. So I've kind of been involved most of my life. So I've never really not known about my disorder.
Michelle also told us about the power of connecting with other blood brothers and blood sisters through summer camps.
The community that I always identified with most was my camp community. I always would say oh, I have my camp family in Michigan. I have my bleeder family in Michigan. But to me, those are people that I've always been able to lean on and go to if I needed support, especially when I turned 14 and got social media accounts. And I'm so glad that I live in the age of social media, because these are always people that I've been able to Facebook message or text if I've needed support for questions, or just someone to talk to who knows what I'm going through that isn't necessarily my family. Because while you love family, sometimes you just need someone else to talk to. So I think that the most important role that the community has played for me has just been there to support. And they've also provided me with so many opportunities, like Shelly Matson, who was I was one of her first campers my first year at camp. So we kind of have the special bond, because I was in her first cabin, and she wrote one of my letters of recommendation for when I joined NYLI. And she's always someone I feel I can text if I need support or questions about certain things. And so these are all special people in my life.
This is Brittany, who also describes finding a sense of community through camp and the national meetings.
I started being a counselor when I was 15, but I actively started being more involved in national, I would say, events and trying to speak at different things after I had gone to the 64th NHF conference. After seeing how incredibly huge that conference was and how much von Willebrand's things they had available that I had never been told, the types of medications that I had never been aware of that no one had ever talked to, that really opened my eyes.
This is Amber Federizo, nurse practitioner.
A lot of the patients, they just wouldn't otherwise be supported or find the courage to continue looking for help, continue looking for treatment, if it's not for the community that's around them supporting them. I know that a lot of people have given descriptors to the von Willebrand community, saying, oh yeah, that group of women, they're very strong and passionate, and I'm not sure if I really want to, talk to them. But this is providers that speak in terms of these groups of women. And I know that has been on the forefront. And they say, well, they're not always educated, so sometimes they're sharing misinformation. And I find that appalling, only because the reason that many of those groups have misinformation is because they weren't educated up front. We failed our job, and then we can't conceivably be mad at them for having misinformation because we failed educating them.
Amber hits on an important point. The disconnect between the medical community and patient community is sometimes more than just two groups not connecting. The lack of broad, standardized awareness and diagnosis and treatment can actually lead to acrimony and distrust between the groups, further widening the disconnect. And it turns out there is not an up-to-date set of accepted official guidelines for VWD that medical providers and patients can look at together. This is Corinne Koenig again.
Having the standards and having guidelines just is one more tool to help advocate and one more tool to help give to providers when they're trying to treat or come across someone who may have VWD. It gives medical providers and those who may not even be as aware a place to start. It gives legitimacy to steps to take when diagnosing, evaluating, and managing VWD. And it also helps the patients advocate for themselves. If they have something that they can bring in with them to talk to their medical provider and say, this is real and this is out there, it can help them advocate for themselves and ideally get the treatment that they need, or at least set them on the right path.
The National Institute of Health's National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, or NHLBI, last published official guidelines for diagnosis, evaluation, and management of von Willebrand disease in December of 2007. For various complicated reasons, the guidelines have not been updated since. Two of the biggest roadblocks are probably pretty obvious. Creating guidelines is slow and expensive.
I think all of us, when we're patients, want to understand what's going on with our health, right? Hi, I'm Ellen Riker. I'm the Federal Policy Advisor for the National Hemophilia Foundation. You get yourself in the hands of an expert, and together sometimes you have to figure out these things because we may not have a good diagnostic test for it yet. That's a huge driver for why NHF wants to see guidelines in this area, as well as the American Society of Hematology does, and the World Federation of Hemophilia does, and ISPH does. The treaters and the patients have a lot of motivation, incentive for guidelines because there is a gap here, that patients aren't detected and diagnosed easily.
Recognizing the need to update these guidelines, NHF held a summit to focus on fixing the gaps in care for people with VWD, and since then has been working to improve diagnosis and treatment for VWD on a handful of fronts. This is Ellen Riker again.
We are in discussions, and we are very hopeful that the guideline process will move forward. In addition to that, we have a group of both treaters, researchers. We've got patient representation and a nurse on the VWD work group, and we're pulling together kind of research topics, the unanswered questions, and where we need to go in VWD research. The final thing we are putting together is this kind of assessment of the existing diagnostics. And one of the issues, and I'm not a physician, so I say this in lay terms, but for some of these tests, it's not just the test that you do, but the laboratory that does the test. The quality of the test is really much better in certain places. So we're doing an assessment of the lab testing and laboratories.
There's so much work being done, but the community may not always know that or see it, and they may feel like the dial is not being moved or it's being moved slowly.
This is Corinne Koenig again.
I am here to say, on behalf of NHF, that this is a major priority, and we are absolutely working very hard to increase awareness. And MASAC VWD Working Group is continuing to work hard on looking at the gaps in medical treatment and diagnosis and all those main topics that affect those with VWD and affect those who are out there trying to get diagnosed.
When we come back, we'll look at how the lack of official, accepted, standardized guidelines and leadership on VWD makes strong community interaction a must for patients and families.
As a person affected by von Willebrand disease, or a person suffering heavy bleeding who thinks they may be affected by von Willebrand disease, it's important to know that you are not alone. Shire is committed to supporting you. They are passionate about providing you, the von Willebrand disease community, with the information and resources you need so you can get the help you deserve. You have a voice. They want to help you raise it. Be seen, be heard. To learn more about how you can manage your condition, visit beyondthebleed.com.
Without official guidelines and without a strong, unified consensus on VWD diagnosis and treatment in the medical community, the bond and wisdom of the VWD community ends up having to fill the information and support gap. Having people who have gone through the system before you is one of the best ways currently to learn how to navigate a system without its own standardized structure. This is Riho.
So, being involved has just been so many positives, and it's led me to where I am today. So it's been more, Some people can look at this as negative, but overall, I'll take these bleeds and these injuries any day because it opened up so many positive things in my life and where I am today. The passion that I received from going to camp and specifically meeting these awesome people, these older guys especially, who have went through so much, and kind of learning from them gave me tools, right? Someone said it the best, but some people go through their whole lives striving and looking for these types of relationships we have in the bleeding disorders community. And here we get to do this quite often. So I think it's something, not everyone gets to experience, but there's a reason why it's led to me where I am today.
This is Jenna.
The other, kind of people who have really, really helped me accept my condition simply by being them and talking about their experiences has been other bleeders. There aren't words. I don't think anyone's invented words in any language, dead, alive, or yet invented, that could possibly describe what it's like when you have something rare like this, when you are the only person you know with it, and then all of a sudden you meet other people and it brings this feeling of normalcy to your life. You're not the only person in the room or building or state or, the planet who knows what you're talking about.
This is Amber.
In patients with VWD, the community has an immense impact, because I can tell you that the patients who have come to be treated here, perhaps from out of state or from large distances, they were encouraged to do so by their community of women who heard them. And they've been to provider after provider after provider. And so some of them had said, you know what? I just don't think there's anything out there. I don't think there's anything I can do. But because they had a community of women and men who were having these same issues, and some of those men and women had success with treatment, they share their story and they share their experience, and they convince them to go and get treatment. They convince them to just go and get evaluated. And, they say, what's to lose? If you haven't been heard and you're not heard again, then you haven't lost anything. You've just gone to this consultation. But if you have the opportunity to get treatment, it is worth it. So the value of community in von Willebrand disorder it's immense.
This is Chris.
And I have found that the von Willebrand's community is starting to pull together, and there are some things that are going to be taking place over the next year that are going to be much more inclusive of that. And I think people are aware of that now. So yes, it can be frustrating. Yes, it probably was more frustrating the years past. But yes, there are a lot of things that are taking place to be much more inclusive of von Willebrand's going forward.
This is an exchange from one of our first interviews with Carrie, whose voice you've heard throughout the previous 2 episodes. The other is our producer, Patrick James Lynch, conducting the interview.
The only real community that I guess I have is I'm a part of now 2 Facebook pages that have families that are affected by this, and that's it. Pretty limited. I do look for other resources here within my state and within, my community, but there really is not much that I have found, and I would absolutely like more information on that or support with that.
What do you think the value of having a community of people affected by von Willebrand disease would be for you?
I'm sorry.
No
I think just having someone who can relate to you, and as a parent with a child with it, can understand the fear, of something happening to your child, that, a minor injury is going to happen to them and have such a much more profound outcome. A child falls and they maybe won't bruise, but our kids are going to have bruises on their legs, and, just that sense of safety is always something that you're concerned about. And that can be really draining as a parent, because as a parent, there's nothing more important in our lives than our kids, and we want for them to be happy and healthy and to grow into amazing adults. But, being a parent and not having a lot of other people to talk to is difficult, and to share that experience with is kind of lonely. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to cry here. One day, my children, but they grow up and when they have kids, I would just want them to have as much support and confidence in everything that they're doing, and I'm hoping that down the road for them, by what you're doing and what I hope to do, we'll offer them that.
This is Kira.
Oh gosh. I reached out. Well, initially my mom had reached out to a newly diagnosed family, and this, they had a young girl with von Willebrand's, newly diagnosed. Her and I still talk to this day, and I get updates about, how she's doing in school and, how her bleeding's going and things like that. And I think that friendship I formed was kind of the reassurance that I had done the right thing, because it was one less girl that had been feeling the way I felt at 12 years old or 13, 14, 15 years old, that was feeling isolated and alone and afraid to be going through what she was going through. And it's that particular girl that, it gives me chills. It's just so important for everyone to have that bit of support. It makes me feel it's our lives. And I'm not saying that your bleeding disorder is your whole entire life, but as a human being, I know that I am more compassionate and I have the ability to be more empathetic towards different people from all walks of life because of what I've gone through and the connections I've made. So I think it makes me realize that if every person changed their outlook and said, I'm one more person with an opinion to be shared, I think that we could better come together as a community and open those lines of communication on a wider level, and then kind of come together to be able to make progress towards approaching, our providers, whether it's insurance, our physicians, our nurses, whatever it is. I think opening lines of communication individually first, and then kind of on the community level, that will help us kind of propel into, what needs to be fixed or what needs to progress.
When we set out to tell the story of diagnosis, treatment, and life with VWD, we knew it would be a complex journey with stories from around the world, and tying it all together would be a challenge. But the profoundly beautiful, difficult, sad, funny, inspiring stories and guidance from our guests gave us the path forward. We came in with big questions, and our guests, who opened their lives to us and gave us their personal and professional wisdom, led us to the answers, at least the answers as we see them. By the way, it goes without saying, feel free to disagree. Let us know. Did we get it right? Is there more to the story? Write us an email or leave a comment on Facebook. We want the conversation to continue. So here's what we learned. Is VWD a health crisis? We learned that the question doesn't really matter. If you're suffering from VWD, it's perfectly legitimate to feel like you're in crisis. If you're isolating yourself and missing class or missing out on life, if you're bullied or misunderstood or feeling hopeless and alone, you have every right to feel like you're in crisis and to tell your advocate, your doctor, your nurse, your hematologist, your partner, your friends, and to seek a solution, a diagnosis, a treatment plan. Life is precious. You have the right to live it fully. Just know that there is a large and active community out here waiting to embrace you and help you on your journey. If you're a doctor, a nurse, a hematologist, an advocate, a skeptic, a medical student, a parent, if you work for a pharmaceutical company, a home care company, we urge you to share this series. Whether you believe in the strict definition of a health crisis as being limited to life-threatening challenges exclusively or not, listen to the stories and the journeys shared here. Whatever you believe, it is undeniable that we have to do more and do better. Thanks for listening. This concludes the BloodLine series, von Willebrand Disease, Diagnosis, Treatment, and Life.
With von Willebrand disease, it's important to know that you are not alone. There are many people just like you who are impacted by the emotional and physical consequences of von Willebrand disease. Whether you are newly diagnosed or have been living with von Willebrand disease for some time, being able to talk to someone who understands what you are going through can be very helpful. Joining a bleeding disorders community and sharing your story may also help others who may share the same questions or concerns. Be seen, be heard, get involved. To find out more about how to join a community of people just like you, visit beyondthebleed.com.
Von Willebrand Disease Diagnosis, Treatment, and Life is made possible by Shire. Check out beyondthebleed.com to learn more. Shire has been supportive of our efforts to create educational content around VWD, and we are truly grateful. This episode is a Believe Limited production produced by Patrick James Lynch, Ryan Gielen, and Josh Davis. Hosted by me, Jennifer Thomas. Written by Ryan Gielen and Seth Kirshner. Edited by Josh Davis. Mixed by Michael Capuano at Iceman Sound. We'd like to thank our guests, Kira Boucher, Brittany Vieira, Michelle Cecil, Amber Federizo, Andrea Trinidad de Chavez, Chris Saraiva, Dr. Robert Sidonio, Jenna Lavelle, Ellen Riker, Carrie Levesque, Kimberly Hugstead, Corin Koenig, Ria Ellen Peak, Zuiho Taniguchi. Thank you for opening your lives to our show and sharing your stories with community members. Your generosity and openness will encourage others to examine their symptoms, speak with their doctor, better understand VWD and the community around it, and made us all feel a little more connected. Please follow BloodStream Media on Facebook and Twitter, and visit bloodlinepod.com for updates and to learn more about our long-form educational podcasts.